All right, hi everyone, can you hear me? Great, so I just wanted to take a moment and first could we all just like take a collective breath together? It feels like it's been a really busy week. Just like, nice inhale and exhale. And maybe whatever you're coming into this space with, the busyness, the rush of the day, we can leave at the door and really just have this time to be present together and appreciative and in gratitude to our three amazing panelists who have come tonight, who will introduce themselves in a moment. Many of you know me, my name's Jessalyn Kazaya. I'm a student here, final year. And this project came out of our Social Justice Action Committee, which has been meeting pretty regularly, and advocacy is something that obviously we talk about a lot at the school, but to hear folks who have been in advocacy for their entire career, who have made huge impacts, it means so much more coming out of the mouths of folks who have been on the ground, not only right now, but throughout their lives, and to gain some wisdom and perspective. So I'm so thankful for all of you for being here. I would sit at any of your feet and listen. So selfishly, I'm very happy that these are the folks we have on the panel. And for those of you that have not gotten the experience yet, you are in for a real treat. So yeah, we're excited about this and also looking for other events to continue doing out through the year in response to folks' needs. And before we get started, we have another announcement about a social justice action that's coming up. So I'm going to pass this off to my sweet friend, Nina.
Thanks, Jessalyn, and thank you all for being here. I just wanted to do a quick plug for the Never Again action that's happening on Sunday, November 24th. Many of you might know about this, but essentially it's an action in Alamance County at the detention center there to demand that they stop collaborating with ICE. They currently have a $2.3 million contract. The sheriff is directly collaborating with ICE, and so the action is following the wave of other Never Again protests that are happening across the country. For folks that don't know about it, I'm going to pass around a sign up sheet, and we can send more information about the Facebook page. And there's a Google Doc that you can fill out if you're interested in coming to kind of get you in the loop. So thanks.
Awesome. And I'm also very grateful to JP for facilitating for us tonight. So here you go. And we will have a few minutes of Q&A at the end.
Excellent. So I am going to be moderating the panel and really just asking questions that were created by the Social Justice Action Committee. So these questions were created by students, which we would have it no other way. So y'all, I'm going to we could go down the line, we could kind of popcorn around however you choose, but there are mics there that should be on, so if you can just grab one for accessibility purposes, that'd be fantastic. So the first question we have for you is, please introduce yourself in whatever way you want to and feel comfortable, and share what advocacy means to you, including what advocacy has looked like in your life. Anyone? Anyone?
Hey everybody, my name is Terry Fenix. I'm the director of the LGBTQ Center. My pronouns are T or he, him, his. And you know, for me, advocacy has looked different across my life. I think that growing up as a queer person in foster care in from a very poor family really shaped how I wanted to make my life matter. And so when I was fortunate enough to go to college on a cross-country and track scholarship, I wanted to work with youth. And I knew that particularly I wanted to work with LGBTQ youth. I kind of came to activism through ACT UP and Queer Nation and the anti-apartheid movement. And so that was my early cutting my teeth. I was one of the ones that was arrested blocking the shipment of AZT out of Girls Welcome very early on in protest of how expensive they made that medication, and was involved in a lot of different direct action things early on. And I also learned how to take my life and use it as a tool. And so I had the ability and the privilege to be out and visible as a queer person. And part of what I learned in ACT UP and Queer Nation was that there was some power in that. And then not everybody was similarly situated to where they had the luxury of being able to be out and visible. And so that it was my responsibility to be out and to talk about my life and to be visible and advocate for and with other people who didn't have that privilege. And so that's throughout my life. I have worked in nonprofit organizations, mostly with LGBTQ youth serving organizations. 13 years ago, or 15 years ago, I guess now, my path led me to UNC Chapel Hill to begin work at the LGBTQ Center. And it was quite an adjustment for me because I still was involved in a lot of direct action kind of work and had just started shifting into working from the inside of the institutions. And that took some getting used to. And I can say more about that because I know we have a question that is specific to that later. So I guess I'll stop there and we can come back to any questions you have about that later.
Thank you, Terry. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Johnson-Hostler. I'm learning to say it very slow because I talk very fast, which you will note I won't be able to talk this slow for very long. So I always introduce myself thinking it's important that people know kind of who I am completely and where I come from, because I think it really makes sense for the rest of my pathway that my career and life has taken me on. So I was born and raised in Thomasville, North Carolina, by my mother and my maternal grandparents, and was very fortunate to have a full village. Thomasville is nestled in between Greensboro and Winston-Salem, so kind of foothills of our state. I grew up not realizing that I was poor or that it was rural, because everybody was poor and everybody was rural. And I think that's important to me in terms of how I see myself in this world and how I center myself. I was born in a very traditional family who went to church. I grew up in a Baptist church, and there everything was very traditional, including how I dressed, what I looked like, and how I presented myself. And so my grandmother loved having a granddaughter, so everything about me was very femme and always has been. And those are things that, initially, for me, when you look for rebellion, those were easy places to rebel. And I still landed back pretty much so where I started, and have not until my 40s appreciated who I am because of the way I was raised, and recognizing that I probably spent way too long rebelling against what's at the core of who I am. And so I do identify as she, her, and hers. And very much so say to people that it also takes a long time to recognize all of your identities, and my Blackness was probably the hardest identity to really live fully into. One of the things about being raised in a town where I graduated from high school in 1993, so segregation wasn't an issue. We had 2 elementaries, 1 middle, 1 high. There was no segregated schools. It wasn't segregated until you were in the building, and I didn't realize until I was in the 11th grade, oh wait, there's a whole school full of Black people, and I think I've only seen 2 every year in classes with me. So it wasn't until then that I realized that there had to be something about who I was as a person, as a Black person. And that has really been the center of my advocacy, is being true to who I am as a Southern Black woman in North Carolina. Because what I learned early on and had to have unlearned is I became very complicit because things were coming to me because I got to be the exception, because I wasn't living fully into my Blackness, because I didn't know it should be a thing. I just knew that life was happening. And again, it wasn't until I was in the 11th grade and we took the PSAT and I was listening to other Black kids talk about their scores, and I was like, wait, that means they're smart and nobody's recognized. And that actually is where my advocacy began. And I didn't have the words of advocacy. I didn't have language to describe what was happening or what I felt. But what I knew in my lived experience is that because I had the space in those classrooms with teachers, with the administration, that I actually could say what was true and what I saw happening for other students. I look back now and realize there were other things that could have been done, but all I did have was my voice, and recognize that using that voice was important. And and important. And I would say that's what really catapulted me into advocacy, is realizing when given the voice, whether it was by choice or because I was the exception, it's what you do with that experience that has made the difference in my life. And so, and we'll talk about inside outside strategy, and I've been on both sides, but I definitely realized that my complacency, for which I was also a kid, but I still own that because I think it was important about not authentically knowing who I was and just able to live into that in the last 4 to 5 years, is largely because being an exception does mean there's an expectation that you're not going to speak out for other people. And I knew with every fiber of my being that was wrong. And I'm very fortunate that it only took me until I was 16 to realize that my voice could make a difference for people, even if in small, minute ways. And I still say that the core of who I am, I learned by lived experience just by virtue of being a Black girl in a small rural community who happened to score well on a 3rd grade test. Because that is absolutely what dictated the rest of my K-12 experience, was a 3rd grade test. And I'm on the Board of Education, which you'll hear about, but those are the things that drive me, is because one test, one day, one point in time allowed a full community to decide who I was and how I would exist. And that's pretty much how I live my full life now, is recognizing that and being able to help utilize my voice and other people's voice around what I call now really squishing the real authenticity, especially of Black women in the South.
Thank you, Monica.
That's not right. UCEB, mi matuluk na wa kana habnen tabunitika, inigo yesa, nere de wahe munti, inigo nonk yejile peti. I just spoke to you in Tutelo. I introduced myself as I'm required to anytime I introduce myself. In English, I said, good afternoon. That's why I looked at my watch. My name is Morningstar. I am Yesa Bearclaim. I am she who carries the fire. My borrowed name is Vivette Jeffries Logan. I'm a citizen of the Occaneechi Band of Saponi Nation. This university sits on land that's the dust of the bones of my ancestor, right? And they are the reason that I'm here today. They're the reason that as an introvert, I speak publicly and I'm sitting up here talking, right? Because I'm 53 years old and I grew up in a culture that said my people didn't exist, even though I grew up in a 4-block radius that everybody looked like me. But when I went to school on the heels of integration, there weren't people in space that looked like me. And I've been lumped into every other racial category, right? Even though I know where I come from. And so when I would go home and I see people that look like me, right? It's like they were the cushion that allowed me, they were the balm for the pain and the scrapes and all of that, right? And I'm thinking when I was in 6th grade, that's when Gifted and Talented started. My mother was an educator in Orange County schools. My father's family's been in Hillsborough since before Hillsborough was Hillsborough. And I'm clear that my face, my skin, that is currency. And so Gifted and Talented started in Orange County schools. I was 6th grade. My brother was in 5th grade. So we were the two children of color that were placed in those classes. And I distinctly remember, so 6th grade, yeah, you're supposed to be able to misspell words, right? Because you're learning. I was terrified to go up to the board and misspell a word because I knew nobody said it, but I knew that if I misspelled a word, not only was it going to reflect badly on me, it was going to reflect badly on the other children who look like me, who they may consider to allow to come into Gifted and Talented, right? I still carry that. I'm 53 and I was in 6th grade and I'm talking about that and my heart is racing right now, right? And, you know, my mother and father were activists, even though they weren't activists. They don't call themselves, they would never call themselves activists. And so, especially my mother, me and my brother, we are sitting in the back of the room grumbling because we had to go to this thing and this thing, this thing, right? My mother actually won the Governor's Award for volunteerism, if that gives you any context for where and when my brother were sitting in the back of the room doing homework, right? So I guess I got it. I learned how to be from her. And I'm a certified executive chef. I did that for 17 years. And when you think about cooks, that's usually women. Chefs is a male dominated profession. I am a certified executive chef. I ran kitchens. I was the second woman in the state of North Carolina to be a certified correctional food service supervisor, which means I had to be certified as a correctional officer, right? I was on an all male facility, me, right, at 23 years old. So I did that. It's like I didn't think of myself as an advocate, but I'm out here doing things because I'm also one that is like, oh, so you say I can't? Watch me, right? Um, and then I went back to school, and it was at Guilford College at 39 years old that I picked up this bundle, which means that I'm doing exactly what I'm doing now, to speak for my people, to remind my people, but also the world, that we're still here. And I end up in places that I never dreamed that I would be. And it is about, as terrified as I am to speak, I do this, right, because my Wakiona, my old ones persevered so that I could be here and give them voice. And so I don't seek the limelight, but when I'm asked, I will go. And also, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And I told you I was a correctional officer, which means that I qualified with 3 handguns. I did self-defense training, right? I did all of that, and I was still a victim of domestic violence, and had to work through all of that, right? Because I'm like, wait, I'm not a victim of domestic violence. I'm not a weak woman, right? That was what was playing in my head. And then work through all of that. I'm like, if that was me, then who else could it be, right? So I'm a survivor. And I share my story because I was the director of training and technical assistance at the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. When I trained advocates, sometimes I share my story. And that's me training. But a lot of survivors, a lot of the people in the training would come up and say, you give me hope, Miss Vivette, because you are a survivor. You were a victim. And now you're standing up here training us. So now I know that I don't have to remain a victim. The things that were said about me, I don't have to operate out of it. So I am an advocate. And when I hit 50, my fierceness went up, and my fear kind of dissipated because I've been told that I'm intimidating. I'm 53 and I'm 5'1", right? But I was told by someone very recently that when I stand and when I speak that I'm 7 feet tall. And I'm clear that that doesn't come from me. So I am an advocate, but I'm also a vessel. My ancestors speak through me.
Thank you so much for that. Thanks to all of you. I'm just completely enamored with each of you. I've known the 3 of you for a really long time, and I'm just really humbled that I get to be here sharing space with you. So the second question, whoever wants to take this up, please be the first. is how do our respective movements, or kind of whatever movements you feel like you're a part of, really feel free to answer this however you feel inclined. How do our respective movements inform each other? And how do we build collective power?
So when I hear the term movement, my mind already goes to boxes, right? And so I was also a trainer and core trainer in curriculum. I helped develop the curriculum with dismantling racism works. So I've done that, and I continue to do that um, because DR works sundown, and I asked for permission. So I continue to use our curriculum. So whenever I hear movements, I think about boxes, right? My work is decolonization. And so when I hear movements, it's like, okay, so the anti-violence movement and the movement to end homelessness, right? LGBTQ rights, right? I come from a circular culture, right? And there's an article that's the 4 auras, which is, and I say auras because I'm from the South. Right? It's relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution. And it's like this. There's no boxes. And I show up at things. I show up to environmental conferences. I show up to anti-violence conferences. I show up to everything. And people are like, well, I thought you did this. As an indigenous woman, everything that I show up to, every movement, not only impacts indigenous people, but usually we are invisibilized and not present in the space. So yes, they impact, but I also push, right, to say, what about the indigenous people? When I see graphs, what about indigenous people, right? And so that's how I think about it. And that unless and until indigenous people are brought into the space, and we're just replicating the system that all movements are trying to dismantle. And so that is how I think about movements. We have to come out of those boxes and understand that violence against women is violence against the environment, right? Is violence against LGBTQ. And I use that it doesn't roll off my tongue for the very reason that there are multiple genders in my culture, right? My nephew is Nambe Mampi, which means two spirit, right? And they are just Itai, right? And so that we walk together and that everything that impacts them impacts me, because that is understanding our circle, because what impacts my nation impacts me. And Hukwene de Wahe means we are all related. So literally, what impacts you all impacts me too. And so, yeah, the movement thing, I'm like, oh, right? We have to be able to have, and I also know that the way the structures are set up, especially around grants and nonprofits, because when I was at the coalition, it's like, oh, we can't talk about homelessness, even though there's data to show that the percentage of, especially women who are homeless, are victims of domestic violence. But we can't talk about that. We're really siloed. So we have to think differently if we're going to honestly begin to dismantle the system that created these silos and issues in the first place.
Thank you, Vivette.
Thank you. I will definitely pick up there. To Vivette's point, I've been a part of a movement. Again, back to language and vocabulary. I started a job, a mission. I tell people it's my heart work, it's my purpose work. And I learned all this language that now I'm still in the process of trying to undo, because where I will pick up where you left off is the word movement should not have been boxes. In its virtual, even without a definition, the visual of a movement is absolutely the opposite of a silo and a box, because it should be fluid, it should have energy, and it has life. And so I've gone back and forth of whether I'm, getting rid of that language or taking back the language, and depends on the day, depends on how I feel about what I'm doing with the language. But I think that's an important thing, because I do believe, which is why I wanted to go right after Vivette so I don't lose this point, because it wasn't in my thought process until you said this, is those movements became boxes because we allowed capitalism to be a part of the work that we were doing, rather than living the work. People who started this work and who called the movement out into the ether was about moving together to change the lives, because the belief was everything we do impacts the other person. Everything that harms you harms me. And so even though I didn't have the language to start talking about it in a capitalistic framework, when I became the director of the coalition at 23, I look back, I'm like, I just knew nothing. I mean, I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes. I'm sorry to all the people who had to endure a baby trying to figure this out. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I can't claim baby anymore. But I say that because those grants had a lot of stipulations. And about 8 years ago, I started saying, well, I'm just going to undo that, because as long as I meet these 3 objectives, that's all the government asks. And whatever else we do in between there is the work. It's the lifeline of why I go to work every day. It's the lifeline of why this is my heart work. And I don't feel bad for taking the government's money, because I recognize, if not me, then who, to do this work from a place of lived experience and being willing to call out those things that are wrong. And so I also say, for me, the movement and the way that I think about all of these things is, and JP knows I have to tell you with my hands. So everything about how we talk about our work at NC CASA, the Coalition Against Sexual Assault, is unfortunately rooted in Monicaism. So take that for what it's worth. It's all got a book told me this. I just facilitated my own meaning. But I believe that everything is about a concentric circle, and there are multiple identities, and those of us with the most marginalized identity is who we all should be moving towards. And that is what should center us. And so regardless of how I personally identify, and Vivette and I were talking about this earlier, because I'm also on the school board, so I spend a lot of time talking to people about racism and the difference between what individuals feel versus what systemically and institutions continue to perpetuate. So that's also about that circle, because the system is what's boxed, right? It literally takes the way that most of us believe in communal living. Again, I told you I lived in Thomasville. There are neighborhoods now, but there were not when I was growing up, so everybody lived on a street. And those streets, literally, I grew up, every other house was racially diverse. Why? Because we didn't have a neighborhood. Red line didn't exist. The railroad track was literally separated where you lived and where you shopped. And so again, when I think about who I am as an adult and how I grew up, I recognize that growing up with very little, but what I was steeped in was love and a solid clarity on my Black skin only indicates what you think of me, not what I think of me. And that is why my voice has to continue to be at this table. And I like Vivette, I'm not sure where I got this from or why I do it, but it's so much bigger than me. There's no way I could have ever defined that this is the space that I'd be sitting in, that I'd be saying to you all, take what you can, because when you start to practice this, these reflection points are what will hold you and center you when it gets hard. Because there will always be people who are anti whatever movement, whatever circle, whatever way that you're trying to do right by people. I believe as long as we believe and live in a capitalistic society, and don't get me wrong, I like things too, but not at somebody's fate, not at changing somebody's life in a way that is detrimental to them and their community, which is our community. That is the distinction. So when people say, are you a socialist? I say, actually, I believe in community. And I believe that that's a big word, and it encompasses a lot of things. And so when we talk about movement, what what I will say, if you take nothing from what I say, think about visually what that word means to you, and then decide how that you act that out in your life. Because I do believe if you get rid of the definition, get rid of what the structures say, and really be true to who you are, I think most of us in here know that movement is energy and it is life. And if we are going to be acting out on that, then we are acting out on those who have voice. But most importantly, that we're putting voices in a space where if I can lift it up because I have the space and the room to do that, then I should and I will. And the same is true for all of us. And because we have multiple identities, that shifts because it's also a movement. So sometimes I might be the person who needs you to lift it up because it is fluid. And it does change the way that people see us, the way that we show up. And so I would ask that you think about most of what we do around activism is fluid, and how you can encapsulate that in yourselves and how you see this work.
Thank you, Monica.
So I would ditto what you all have said, and I think I want to take it a little bit from a different perspective and share a little bit about my journey around understanding movement, because for all the good things that ACT UP and Queer Nation taught me, they were very steeped in whiteness, and they were very steeped in this idea that this narrow box was what we were supposed to work on. And I think I have spent my life trying to unlearn some of those lessons. And I find it really challenging, even in the space that I work now. You know, I work at the LGBTQ Center at UNC Chapel Hill, and the powers that be want us to stay in our silos. They really want us to stay in our silos. They don't want me to talk about issues of race or disability or homelessness or socioeconomic status. They really get nervous when I stray outside what they say is my designated area of expertise, right? So you got to watch the language that people will try to use to paint you in boxes and keep you from making connections with other people that can be really meaningful and life-changing. And that is something that I am still trying to unlearn, and to learn how to do this work differently. And it is not easy to try to change a system that is invested in keeping us separate and segregated and small.
Thank you, Terry. I just love y'all. Okay, next. I was so enamored, I forgot that I actually have questions. There's another one, I promise. Let me get to it. I have to unlock my computer. Okay, here we go. So y'all talked about this a little bit, but we would love to hear more about this to the degree that you feel comfortable sharing. How do you feel like your perspectives on your own work have changed over time?
And I'll try to be brief. I'm practicing brevity, not a gift that I have either. Talking fast. Talking fast, by the way, does not mean I'm brief. It just means I get more in. That's the goal. Talk fast and get more in. I'm forever trying to change the world through talking fast and packing in a subject. That is what I've learned. I mean, I've talked a lot about what I've learned, what I'm trying to unlearn, trying to decide what you unlearn, like what you take back, because quite frankly, so much about capitalism and whiteness absolutely were rooted in taking the mere gifts from people who were already on this land, people they brought to this land, but took them and put them and painted them in boxes. And so that's why I struggle with, even at 44, I'm like, am I taking it back to reclaim it, or am I gonna undo it? And I, again, because I do think it's okay to be fluid, I do think that we can exist with multiple ways of thinking without boxing ourselves in. And that's also something that I've had to also allow myself to be okay with. Because again, when you're gifted and you're told, if you know these things, then you're smart, right? One day, one point in time measures just that day and that point in time, nothing more. But we're not led to believe that. We're led to believe that those things are indicative of who we are, and then it sets the trajectory of our life. Now that I am willing to undo, because I do think that learning is powerful. It should not be debilitating. And so for me, that's that is also a part of why so much of who I am and how I show up in this work has shifted over time. I would definitely say age, right? I mean, because I do believe the longer I live, the more wisdom I'm able to hear my ancestors whisper into my ear, and I'm actually able to receive it and not rebel against it. And I own that fully, especially now that I'm a 14-year-old. And I'm realizing so much of rebellion is about having your own identity, but that identity for me is, I'm like, I have a single identity. It is rooted in a community of identities that makes us a full and important and valuable asset to each other. And so I think that's why I've gone back and forth, is trying to decide, who am I? Where do I identify? Do I need a single identifier? And then I realized, oh, no. That would be the culture telling me that. That is actually not necessary. And so I also think that, I'm also at a place I'm not willing to beat myself up about it. I'm okay to say, I felt that way yesterday, but today I don't, because, Vivette says something that now I'm going to take with me tomorrow and say, wait, I should think about this differently. And so I think you should always allow yourself to be learning and to be okay in shifting who you are and how you show up without losing the essence of who you are. So change does not mean it changes the authentic self. It just means you allow yourself to learn and glean from other people to make your life more colorful. I'm like obsessed. This tie is everything to me, because I'm like, it's got movement, it's got color, and I've shot as a darker skinned woman. I've stayed away from color. I've only worn black, gray, brown, literally for the last 2 decades. And now people are like, you should wear color. And I can remember my grandmother saying to me, you look good in bright colors. Don't let anybody tell you don't. And now I realize she was telling me that because I need it for a different season in my life. Right? I didn't need that at 14 because I wore what they bought, but I needed it for this season in my life when I was okay with who I am. And that takes a lot of work. And some days I still am struggling with who I am and versus the way people see me. And so I think so much about who you are in your work and in your purpose is also about how you see yourself. And that also shifts. And so that's how I would identify those change in my career and the pathways I've taken, is really been based on who I see myself as and how I see myself in community. And that is a hard reality to face, because most of us strongly believe, I'm doing this for the people, I'm doing it for the community. And so much of that means that we forget who we are, and then we're not taken care of. And so that's why I think so much has shifted. When I'm getting older and I need more rest. And it's true. I had to learn it by biology, not because I believed I was worth it. And that's what I'm hoping that young people can hear me say. It's okay to shift, especially when you're shifting for yourself.
Thank you, Monica. Also, I can't believe that Gabby is 14. That is wild. Okay, sorry.
So I think I've referred a little bit to some of the shift that I've experienced over the time that I've been involved in activism and advocacy, in terms of the broadening of what I see as the work that I'm responsible for. I think the other thing that I would say is, when I first came to movement work, I was very much about being on the outside of the system and burning the system down. And if you had told me when I was 20 that I would work inside a system like UNC Chapel Hill, I would have been very upset with you and very angry with you and probably called you some bad names. How could you ever think that I would? I think that what has happened is that I started to see that while I can burn things down from the outside, a lot of times I can't rebuild something in there. And so I have come to find that both working within the system and outside of the system are necessary. Neither of them is sufficient unto themselves. They are both necessary. And so I kind of spent the first half of my life working from the outside in, and now have been spending the latter part working from the inside out. I think the other thing that I would say is I was very naive when I came to the work of trying to change the world. I had a really strong belief that if I educated people about what they were doing that was problematic and harmful, and told them a different way that they could do the work and that it would serve people better, I really thought they would do differently. I thought, of course they would. And what I have come to see is that for some people, education is sufficient. It is always necessary, but for many people, it is not sufficient. Power does not give itself up easily. And so I have come to find out that there are some changes that can only be made when somebody dies. This is being recorded, so I may get in trouble for saying that, or when the law, the legal, the courts make something change, or there's a sufficient enough shift in generations, because some people just aren't going to change what they do and how they are. And that has been a hard thing for me to come to terms with, and to figure out how to maintain hope in the face of those realities.
Thank you, Terry. Oh, yeah, so the question is, pardon, sorry. Where are we here? Here we go. The question is, how have your perspectives on your own work changed over time?
It really changed when I turned 50. All of my elders told me, especially the women, said that when I turned 50, something would shift. And I'm like, oh, really? No, it did. What changed for me is living my values, right? So I work with organizations, with leaders, right? Because I do racial equity, organizational development, and leadership work. And the word that floats around is integrity as a value. Well, the way I understand integrity, it's not a value, because you have to have your foundational values that allow you to stand in them, which is integrity. Right? So, and I get a lot of, wait, I don't understand. Because it's like, what are you standing in? What is the foundation of your integrity? What are your values, right? So I stand in my values, which means sometimes I push against the norms, right? That I am known as the angry Indian woman, and I own every bit of that right now, right? I've been told that, well, you don't have this training, and you don't have that training, and you don't have that training. And I also know that sometimes the training, as Ron Chisholm says, sometimes the more training and the more titles and the more education you have, you're being groomed to fit inside of the system, the boxes, right? Now, the other thing is I'm in relationship with people who are all along the system, right? Like I walked with my nephew through their PhD program and held space for them in a brutal process, right? So whenever I'm going into the system or I'm fighting in the system, that I maintain relationships with my community, because I'm clear that there are times when I've been lifted up as the unique and special snowflake, and we're all unique and special snowflakes. But I'm also clear that the system is fickle, very fickle, which means that when they're done with me, I will be spit out like a corn husk, right? And bring in the next person. So not believing the hype, right? But also in my culture and my people say, keep your feet on the ground, so that when they're done with me or when I walk away, I still have my community and I'm not out here by myself. So I've learned to stand in my integrity. I have learned to also sit with people who are chronologically younger than me that carry immense wisdom, right? I come from a culture that believes in intergenerational wisdom, right? And so I'm in community. I know I'm a gatekeeper, and I talk about this. And one of my responsibilities is, yes, I'm a gatekeeper. I will not allow people through me to get into the communities that I have access to. And this is selfish, because if you go with my name, as my people say, with my name in your mouth, if I'm vouching for you and you do something that's detrimental, that's my social capital, which means I don't have anywhere to go, right? So it is selfish. So people with malintent won't get through me, and then that's how I become the angry, bitter Indian woman, right? And I want to, so this just came out in the News and Observer, which is why I have my phone up here, because I want you all to, this just came out. And this is today in 2019. This is what we are facing, Indigenous people are facing, right? Just bear with me. Google is saying no. See? All right. So it's in an article called Charter Schools for American Indians is Rejected After the NC Board Rules It Too Divisive. One of the board members on the, what is it, Monica, the NC? Something, yeah, Charter Schools Board. She says, and this is about one book that they spoke about. I did not find one thing in the book that talked about the greatness of America, she says. Now let me make perfectly clear. America has sins. There are things I wish we had never done, slavery included. Bad marks on our country, but we learn from them and we're changed and we're not what we used to be. I've got to say that everything I found was divisive instead of bringing unity. That was today. That came out in the News and Observer today. That is why I continue to do what I do. And I know that advocacy has changed, right? Because social media, there was no such thing, even when I was in college, right? But also why I'm in relationship with people who are chronologically younger than me, because I want to stand with them, because I don't want my grandchildren to have to experience this right here, because this is bringing up things that I went through when I was a child.
Thank you so much for that. So we would love to hear where you are centering your work right now. And what we mean by that is what feels, is there anything specific you want to speak into that feels salient for you that you would love the group to know about, that you're feeling like you really are kind of centering your attention toward at this moment in your work?
My work is centered on decolonization, which means that touches on everything, right? Everything. It is about, and it's like Freire and Fanon, it's not about flipping it, where the oppressed become the oppressors. It's understanding and working toward a system that's equitable for everyone, which also means that I'm in relationship with people who are doing work everywhere, because I'm not. That's another thing, going back to the last question. I value myself. And because I understand that my health impacts everybody else's, right? So I learned how to say no and know that I don't need to be everywhere all the time. 3 years ago, this is American Indian History Month, y'all, okay? 3 years ago, I almost died because it was like anytime somebody asked, I was like, yes, yes, yes. This year, well, 2 years ago, I was like, no, I'm going to rest doing American Indian History Month, right? So it's about that, but also decolonization envelops everything. So that's why I end up being in several, it's like, how did you end up here? I thought you were in this movement, and that movement, and that movement. I'm in all of it. So that's where my work is centered.
Thank you for that.
I saw the question, and it's still a her question. So I think it's a little hard for me to kind of synthesize it. So just walk with me, and maybe we'll end up in a place that makes sense. So I've worked in nonprofit work, both doing outside advocacy on issues that were not at the time in the box of anti-sexual violence. So that was more like racial justice, criminal justice reform, which are still very much so a part of my work. But something shifted when I ran for the school board, mostly because I didn't see it as an election until I had to run an election. I saw it as, oh, I'm going to represent my community because this lovely gentleman does not represent anybody in our community, nor is he attempting to represent anyone in our community. I mean, he was representing someone, just not the rest of us. So I should clarify that. So this is my 6th year as elected official, and I think I just started owning elected official probably about in year 5. And mostly because at that point I was in leadership, and all of my time was in relationship with elected officials who were decision makers. Because at the local level of school, I make a decision, I always say, on a red book, which is the book that tells you how to govern yourself, which, by the way, we're changing to how we should govern our culture versus how you govern yourself inside of our culture. We'll see how long that lasts. But it's been a great journey to be on with board members who have been really committed to what our responsibility is as the adults and the rule makers versus what we say children, because they are chronologically children, what they should do. And so when we started, when it took me 5 years to convince people that we should think about school differently, what I realized is I knew exactly what I wanted certain things to say because I understood how they had personally impacted me. But ultimately what I wanted to create was something that most people couldn't reimagine. And that is, how do all children excel in educational institutions? Again, how do all children excel in educational institutions? Guess what? They don't live in the educational institution. So that meant for me, the institution had to see itself as a part of the community. And then how do you build that? And so I honestly, if I really think about what I'm centering, it is really centering, which is a hard thing as a Southern Baptist Black woman to own, is power. Because the power analysis is a hard analysis to grapple with, because power, so much of my life as a Black person, has been associated with harm and hurt. And so I still struggle in this moment to say that's what it is. But I also recognize being elected does give me some semblance of power. Not the same power as my colleagues that don't look like me, but some semblance of power. And what does reimagining power look like? To do what it is I know we have to do in community, for all of us to thrive and to create the culture that I believe that we all deserve. And so I've been trying to center, what does that look like? And so people are like, you're running for Congress, you're still on the school board, you have a child, you're married, you work at NC CASA, and they're like, how are you? It is the healthiest I've ever been. Which is a very odd thing to say, because I never imagined that being able to harness power meant centering me. I had to actually own who I am, what gifts I've been given, and quite frankly, to not deny the vessel that I am. And that was really, really hard, because it's hard to say to people that I think this gift is bigger than me, that nothing I do is me, right? It's all the things that are given to me to ensure that I can actually project them out. And so centering those things have truly made me healthier. I go to, JP, you can appreciate this, I actually go to bed. I've suffered the least amount of insomnia that I have in my entire life. I've struggled with insomnia for over 20 years, and I think I've slept almost 20 days straight, which is like a miracle in my life to sleep. I'm eating healthier. And it is because I realized that if I'm going to do what I think I was put here to do, that I actually have to be okay with who I am. so that I'm giving my best self to receive the messages, to reimagine how do we create the community that I absolutely believe that I wasn't able to give my 14-year-old, because she's experiencing all the harshness right now every day, because she does consume media, although sometimes very good media. She actually reads the news more than I did at her age. So I go back and forth about media and social media because she's far more in tune to what's happening in the world because it's at her fingertips. But so she's experiencing some of the harshness of why I struggle with who I am and what I've been gifted to do on this earth. But I do know that we do have the power, that the next generation does not have to endure that, because it's a choice. And to your point, I just actually did, so we do community circles. One of the things as a school board member is we're doing circles in schools, but I also went to my community and said, we also have to do that. We got to figure out what we are doing. We can no longer say Monica's daughter got a thing. We have to go back to our community's got a thing. And how do we do this? And that community circle has been life-changing, I have to tell you, because something about sitting in circle with people changes how you show up regardless of who you are. However, I just had a bishop, was his title, say some people are going to have to die off. And so when you said that, for me, I believe in confirmation. I believe that when things happen in my life, the first time I hear it, I take note. The second time, I write it down. The third time, it's real. I absolutely believe in the Trinity of three things. So when you said, I was like, that's it. And that to me is clarity, that some will die off, but we will invest in those. We will be in community. And the next generation does not have to endure the hurt and harm that all the generations before have both endured and inflicted, and sometimes both. Right? Because hurt people. And so it's hard to say, and I don't think I would have ever said it. Now it's recorded, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I do. I think that's honestly the real answer. I think I've centered who I am so that I can take better care of the community and the gifts that I've been given.
Thank you so much, Monica.
So, I think for me, what I am centering and what I have been centering in the last 5 years of my life is really a continuation of a journey that I began in 1987 when I started working with the anti-apartheid movement. And that is looking at what it means to be a white person in this society and looking at how whiteness has been constructed and used as a weapon to marginalize and oppress other people, both interpersonally and systemically. And what does that mean for how I show up in the world? And so, I am still doing LGBTQ work, and that work has broadened. And so I'm talking about more things. But I still feel like a lot of my responsibility is to do my own work as a white person. And because that's the place that I hold privilege. And so it means it's often the place that I am the most blind about, and the most blind about how I do harm in the world, even though I don't mean to. And I think that is one thing that, I spend a lot of time. I just finished reading the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Fantastic book. Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And I think that I see this as an ongoing journey throughout the rest of my life. And that is a sacred responsibility that I have. And so I have like what I'm doing in the world, which I would say is really trying to recognize that, I'm not going to see the end of the liberation for all people in my lifetime. That's not going to happen. And so one of the other things that I'm centering is really investing in people that are younger than me, both very much my daughter, who is 9, and trying to give her the tools to walk in a world and be resilient in a world that is going to try to harm her, and to change a world to be something that is a better place. So those are the two things that I would say: doing my own work, and then doing the work of trying to invest in the generation that's going to come after me, because I'm not going to see the work finish when I die.
Thank you so much, Terry. So the final question we have for y'all is something each of you have touched upon already, but we would love for you to share some more thoughts. A lot of us in the School of Social Work, at least in the time that I've been here, the few short months, we've been talking a lot about the kind of struggle of working either within or without, and does one need to choose, and what does that look like? So do you have any final thoughts for folks in the room about this kind of juxtaposition of what it looks like and what it means to work in versus work without, and does one need to choose, and how have you thought about that in your life? Any final thoughts?
So I've been in community with about 60 colleagues from about 35 states for the last almost 3 years, talking about strategy with Norma Wong and what that means. And I feel solid and sound on being community with both, and those things can transition. Both are necessary. And whatever role you find yourself in, like right now, so much of what I'm doing and centering is inside those walls. But I personally, and we go back to emergent strategy, I'm not working on the inside without knowing what you're doing on the outside. So I would say those things for me are most likely to achieve the world that we're all committed to for the next generation, is do it in tandem. And when you find yourself only with one group, I assure you, we are missing the mark to make the greatest impact. Because just like any game you play, if we are not playing together, I don't actually know what you're doing, even if we're playing the same game. So it is necessary that we are together, so that when you are taking down, when you're burning down the building, I've already constructed the insular, so that we know what is going to sustain us when that thing is gone. And so that's what I would say, is do them in tandem. And if you know which one you are today, then I reckon whatever you're centering, then I challenge you to know who's doing the other.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto. And I would say finding a way to do both wherever you are, right? So I support a lot of organizations that do direct action through my financial giving. You know, I don't have a whole lot to give, but where I give, I want to make it count. And right now, since I'm on the inside of a system most of the time that I am doing the work, I want to support the people that are doing the complementary work, and I want to stay in touch with what's happening. So for example, Southerners on New Ground is a group that I will call out that is doing some kick-ass work. And so I think that it is about not just knowing what the other complementary paces are doing, but finding ways to support both of them in the work that you're doing in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Terry.
Yes and yes. And it's also about being in relationship. And I'm not talking about transactional relationship. I'm talking about relationships, right? Not about, well, can you come and do this? And it's a checkbox. It's about being in relationship, like knowing what people's favorite food is, knowing what kind of coffee to bring them, right? Like who are your, so in indigenous cultures, we ask, so we don't run up on each other and say, are you indigenous? Right? It's who's your people, which we're place-based people, and that helps me understand, oh, okay, right? It's who's your people. It's about getting to know each other on a human level, beyond all the boxes that we've been forced into, and then knowing what your medicine or your gift or talents are, and in tandem, right? And always, as I say, if you're in a system, don't let your feet leave the ground, right? And because I now work for myself, and I'm outside of systems, what I ask is, what do you need me to do, right? I'm an accomplice. I'm not an ally. Accomplice has a deeper meaning, right? And I'm willing to take risks because I'm not getting a paycheck from an organization, and I'm also not getting a degree from an institution. So my level of risk is lower than someone who's on the inside of the system, right? but I don't take it upon myself to be so cavalier as to say, this is what I'm fighting for, without being in relationship with the people who are the most impacted, right? So I'm working in tandem, but also leveraging my privilege, right, and my power in a way that, again, is going to create a system that's equitable for all of us.
You all got a lot out of this. This is really, really personally, I'm sorry. I was like, thank you.
Yeah, I know. It's just, what a gift. So we have about 10 minutes to open it up for questions. Just want to kind of note where we're at in terms of our evening. So we could, if folks feel so inclined, do a Q&A. We could also go eat ice cream and chat a little more informally. If folks are into that. We do have an activity set up out there where we're gonna, we don't have an activity set up. Sarah is currently setting up an activity, which might take a couple minutes, that involves just kind of sharing some of your thoughts and your offerings related to what you received from the panel. In a visual way, if you're interested in doing that. But we do have some time for Q&A. So does anyone have any questions for anyone on the panel? Yes, Lee Doyle in the front. Yes.
Awesome. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate y'all being here. I have a question kind of to follow up on the last one about about the one about centering. I was thinking about what feeds you and what nurtures you in this work, because so much of our social justice and advocacy work can be so burdensome sometimes, and it can also run us really low. And not to say that burdensome, I think that's the wrong word. I think, anyway, interpret how you will. It can be hard work. It can be draining. And I'm curious what feeds you and what nurtures you and what makes you still want to come to work and do the hard work.
So that question brought up emotions for me, because more times than I can count, I'm usually the only Indigenous person in space. I was up in Northern Virginia at an education conference, right? And we were having lunch and the line was too long and we were getting a buffet. And I walk in and I have my plate in my hand, my business partner's with me. And I stopped and stood in the back, and the room was already full, and I'm an introvert, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta find a space. There's no empty tables, right? But then I'm like, my business partner was like, come on. I stood and I was almost in tears, because there was an Indigenous woman standing at the podium speaking about her experience in education. And I'm getting goosebumps now, because that is what feeds me, that I'm not the person. I'm not the Indigenous person, because it was only 2 of us, and this was a educators of color conference, but it was 450 people and 2 Indigenous people, right? But the immense power that I felt, that I stood there, I know, for 5 minutes transfixed, feeling what it felt like to hear and see another Indigenous person at the podium sharing their stories, and it wasn't me, right? And then I did fangirl, I really did, because I ran up and I was like, and we took pictures and had conversation, but I'm still moved by that. And so what feeds me is being able to sit in the back or sit up front and clap for other Indigenous people who are speaking truth to power. And that is what feeds me, right? Coming to this university and seeing young people up speaking, that feeds me because it's like, okay, I don't always have to be the one, and the future is bright, right? Because they're using their voices.
I really appreciate the question, and I can't say how important a question that this is. You know, there is a quote that talks about, and I can't remember it exactly, though it's on my door, that talks about self-preservation is not indulgence, it is a political act of resistance. And I think that finding ways to feed my soul has been something that I have had to learn. I find mystery in nature, and that is the balm for my soul. I am too an introvert. It is doing this work where I am out in front talking to people is really taxing for me. And I need that time solo in nature. I will also say that I read voraciously, and I read about people who have done this work before me and who are doing this work now. So some of my people that I have quotes around my office, you know, Audre Lorde is probably the person who I have the most quotes by, you know, Leslie Feinberg. I mean, I could go on and list these names of these people who have given their life in service and who have written about their experience and shared their wisdom. And so I hold on to that. I think the other thing that I will say is really noticing when I get to make an impact, because there are so many times that I feel like I'm banging my head against a wall. And sometimes it's really small things. So like last year at the end of the year, I was able to get someone a diploma with their preferred name on it, right? Now that may sound like a really small thing, but it was a hell of a lot of work to get done in this institution. And it meant the world to that person because they now have a diploma that they can hang, and it has their name, their actual name. And so those are some things that I think I would share from my perspective. But I really encourage you, like, find that thing that nurtures your soul and find the community of people that nurtures your soul, so that when you have days that are really hard and frustrating and you wonder why you do this work, there's someone there that can help you remember.
Very similar. I always say that my feet firmly planted on the soil and my faith center me. My work drives me, and my family feeds me. And I just stand in those three things as my truth. That and I have to say I've never felt depleted, because those things, and when I start to see them shift again, because because of my faith and my family, inevitably I may not know how I got back there, but I'm right back centered. And so I think it's important to know what feeds you, which nourishes and sustains you, and ensure that that those things work together with what drives you, because it's what drives us to do this work that could deplete us. And so it also helps to have a child, because boy, she can get me centered pretty quickly. Oh my gosh, you're like, oh wait, hold on, you're right. That is not where I should be focused. So and that does feed my soul, right? Because it's, you know, you get to see the future is bright, you all. Like, we may not be able to see it today because of the cloud that is currently clouding our country, but truly it is bright. It is bright, and it feeds my soul to know that they are engaged and we're engaged with them. And so it also feeds my soul to pour into them. I love young people. I do. I love giving them the truth so that they have the tools to speak truth to power earlier than I did. And that is also nourishing to me, to be able to see that manifest at very young ages when they're your own.
You have a few more minutes if there's maybe one more question. How much did that cost? We put that in the grant.
I know. Just have a little thing like that.
Maybe
That's a great way to put it. Okay. There's no ice cream.
Hello. Sorry I interrupt the ice cream cackles that are very real for me as well. This is it's not really a question, but it's based off conversation we had today with the Social Justice Action Committee. And I think as a student with impending graduation soon, any kind of charge you all have for young people, I already feel charged by all that you all have said. Thank you very much. But if there anything like final words that you would want to leave with this younger generation?
Find your people, find your tribe. Now, so you know what they look like when you get there. Yep. Find your people. Know what they look like. Know what it feels like. And by look, I don't mean visually, right? I mean the connection, the relation. Because again, even if there are other things that feed your soul, you need soldiers in this with you. If social justice is going to be your work, your life, and what drives you, find your tribe. You will know them when you see them. Here is where you see them, the heart.
I think the charge, there's a lot of charges I would like to give, but so take everything that we have said and include that in the charge. But the thing that I would say I want to call out in particular is it's real easy to know places where we are marginalized. It's real easy to feel the places the world pinches us. And I think it is imperative to spend some time looking at places where we have privilege and paying attention to how that manifests itself, how you show up in the world around those identities. So, you know, if you're able-bodied, if you come from higher socioeconomic status, if you're white, you know, go through the list of demographic variables and think about, where do I have privilege? And what does that mean? Not just, oh, I have privilege and that's it and I'm done, but interrogate that. Like, what does that really mean? And how does it influence how you show up in the world and how you interact with other people? And what do you need to do so that you're not unintentionally doing harm to others in those places where you have privilege?
I think this is a through line. That's why I'm breathing. And it goes back to relationships, right? That to build relationships, authentic relationships across all those boxes, right? Yes. And when you spoke about naming and owning privilege, that's something, there's an exercise that Timma Oaken led me through, and I'll never forget it, right? Right? We were co-trainers together, but I went to something that she led, and I was steeped in I'm an indigenous woman. I'm wallowing in my oppression. And she's like, how did we meet? And I'm like, well, I got a college degree. How did you get here? Oh, I walked up the steps. Okay, so everybody. Who are you married to? Oh, I'm married to Douglas. Oh. And I did not go to Walgreens and purchase those privileges, which means I can't give them back, which also it does not make me a bad person because I'm operating out of those privileges that I didn't choose, the system chose it. So what I do is I'm in relationship with people who are marginalized because of the privileges that I have, to be in relationship with them. Again, how do I need? What do you need me to do, right? how can I leverage my privilege to undo a system that privileges me, because I'm really clear that my privilege, me as a privilege, when I'm speaking from my privilege, carries more weight than those voices who are marginalized. But I don't do this by myself. I am in relationship with people who are marginalized, right? And it's a dance, right? Because I'm calling on them, right? Like, okay, so yeah, you marginalized and we have privileges. So it's a both and. So building relationships, relational relationships, right? Not transactional, and not so that I can be the poster child out there holding, standing, blocking things, right? Because I'm also clear that my role, I'm so as in culinary, it's like I'm back of the house, but that's just as important as front of the house, right? So honoring all of our medicines and not just the people who are out on the front lines, right? So that's my charge. It's all about relationships because we are socialized. This Western culture is very individualized, and none of us can survive by ourselves. So it's about building relationships. As each one of these, as Monica and Terry said, it's about, they said it in different ways. I heard it in the same thing. It's about who are you? Who are your people, right? Who's your people? Find your people.
Can we just give a giant?
Well, yes, because y'all deserve a round of applause between every question, then a question, then another round of applause, and then another round of applause.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a second-year student, and at my field placement last year at a community partner meeting, Vivette, you actually spoke with your partner doing equity work and it was a Family Success Alliance collaborative meeting. The specific date was March 7th because I sent a lot of people a quote that came from that workshop, and the words, I don't know if this is putting you too much on the spot. I apologize if it is, but the words where inclusivity is bringing people into a structure that doesn't change. It's the enemy to equity. It is emotionally damaging to bring people and to change the landscape without actually changing the structure. Those words, sort of even entering the second year and about to go into my last semester, have definitely still stayed with me. And so I'm curious for you and for everyone on the panel, what does changing the structure and like the foundational work of equity, what does that actually look like? And how do you not get caught up and swept away with diversity and inclusion work and lose like truly what equity is?
So for me, it may seem small, right? So whenever we start workshops, it's not about, or even speaking engagements, it's like name, and depending on the amount of time, the name, on whose shoulders do you stand, and to whom are you accountable? That throws people, right? Well, we start off with breathing, right? And to see people squirming and being uncomfortable and checking watches and stuff. And it's like, wait a minute, no. If we're going to talk about equity, and especially if I'm speaking about indigeneity, being an indigenous woman, it's small steps, right? To shift the environment in the room. And so that's what this is. And I was going to facilitate an equity workshop, right? An intensive before a conference. And I was going to ask those questions. And my white co-facilitator was like, no, we have to send that out via email prior to people showing up. And I was like, nope, because some white people don't know who their people are. And I was like, you think? But that is the learning moment. That discomfort, that's part of decolonization, right? And so that is the work that I do. And that quote, right? Putting people into the same structure just changes up the hue of the place. And as someone who has been a twofer, right? And as someone who has been hired to do equity in an organization and was almost chewed up, I know that pain. And if I can prevent that on my watch, then that's my work.
So much to say about that, and I think Vivek actually summed it up and well. And I think knowing is only half the battle. It's whether you're really in a place personally to do the rest of the work. It is easy to be inclusive, and by easy I mean we can figure that out, right? We can shift people around, we can move chairs. Think about a structure in this auditorium. The chairs are stationary. You can't move them, right? We could still change the structure inside this room and it still look the same, right? We can bring in chairs, we can bring in rolly desks. So if you think about it in the most small, insignificant way, think about a room or a building and how inclusivity looks like making adaptive change. That's what inclusivity is, right? I'm going to put, oh, we're inclusive right here. We just made inclusivity right. Literally, I just looked, I was like, oh, we're inclusive, right? I mean, that would be inclusive. We made room for people who are not able-bodied. That is a structural adaptive change we've made. Equity looks like we'd have to take things apart, and we have to take those things apart and ensure that people who need different things are able to get it without being penalized. So again, I think the easiest way, this is how I describe it. So in our school system, we now have equity teams, and that's how I've been talking to my babies, the little people, about it in elementary, is let's shift the room around. Okay. And I say to them, how do you make it inclusive? How do you make sure everything in here has a place and that everything in here fits? Because that's what inclusivity is supposed to be. You have a place, you fit, we squeeze you in that little box and there you go. But how do we actually do the technical work and take this apart? And that's why I also use the example of when my friends are burning down the building, I'm gonna need an alternative on the inside so that we can still live, breathe the work that we intend to do. And so hopefully that helps you kind of think about it in a very insignificant way with inanimate objects, that we know what inclusivity could look like, but you could actually also make the technical, do the real work. And that's to me what equity looks like. And it's different based on what people need. And actually inclusivity, we don't ask what you need. We just do it based on what we think. Equity means I got to ask you, what do you need to ensure that you are able to be your full, authentic, and best self in the space that we're occupying together?
I think another example that I would give is from disability justice, is the concept of universal design. Inclusivity is like, I'm going to give you a piece of adaptive technology so that you can operate within this environment that really is not built for you. Universal design is, let's build something that fits for the most number of people with the fewest amount of adaptation. And so for me, that's a real simple way that I conceptualize the difference between inclusion and equity.
I was trying to figure that out.
Honestly, just want to thank so much from the bottom of my heart, all of y'all for being here. Always a really so feel free to go into the lobby and hang out. And or just to get spoons and gather around the cart.
You might have to be a dad.
Slowly make our way.
And we also have. So we also have sticky notes and a whiteboard out there. If you want to write any reflective thoughts or actions, you can put them on the board, and we've been kind of collecting those as inspiration. So those are out there, and there's still dinner available too, along with your ice cream. So that's all I have for announcements.
You are serious about it.
I am. 1, 2, beautiful faces. I love it. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
So great. It really was.
Power on the stage.
I got some bullshit.
I did.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I just want to.
Thank you.